On the morning of the 17th of November, 1869, the Suez Canal opens. Ships glide through its waters, carrying trade, ambition, and dreams. Every deck hums with pride, yet behind the triumph, the silent chess of empires quietly unfolds. On the 30th of November, 1864, the Battle of Franklin rages in Tennessee. Union forces under General John McAllister Schofield push back Hood's Confederates, decks of smoke and courage rising from the battlefield, while behind the victory, the heavy toll of war silently lingers. On the 9th of April, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrenders to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Pride and relief ripple through the ranks, yet beneath the handshake, the scars of war and the uncertain path of a nation quietly linger. 1846, workers trudge back to Granville's California gold mine after a long midday meal. Dust clings to their clothes, hands roughened by toil, yet eyes glimmer with dreams of fortune. While the harsh reality of gold fever quietly shadows every hopeful step. A woman stands poised in her crinoline, attendants using long poles to lift the heavy hoops and arrange her dress. Each careful motion reveals the elegance and burden of fashion, a delicate balance of beauty and constraint, while behind the fabric, her patience quietly endures. In 1897, a woman perches atop a Scorcher bicycle in St. James's Park, poised between adventure and decorum. The wind teases her skirts as onlookers watch, caught between curiosity and admiration, while the thrill of newfound freedom hums quietly beneath the polished wheels. In 1892, Alexander Graham Bell speaks across the miles, making the first telephone call between New York and Chicago. Voices leap through wires, bridging cities and possibilities, as the dawn of a connected world quietly begins, reshaping how people will speak, work, and dream. An undated photograph shows the model of Alexander Graham Bell's first electric-speaking telephone. Simple yet revolutionary, it holds the promise of voices traveling unseen across distances, hinting at a future where conversation leaps beyond walls and wires, quietly reshaping human connection. In April 1896, crowds flood the Panathenaic Stadium for the first modern Olympics in Athens. Voices, cheers, and footsteps mingle as history awakens. Athletes chase glory, and a world long divided glimpses unity, while the promise of international competition quietly begins to take hold. April 1896. The Panathenaic Stadium brims with spectators as the first modern Olympics unfold in Athens. Excitement pulses through every corner, nations gather, and athletes strive for glory. Yet beneath the celebration, the seeds of global rivalry and enduring legacy quietly stir. On the 17th of December 1903, the Wright flyer lifts from Kill Devil Hill. Orville grips the controls, Wilbur watches with tense anticipation, and the wind carries the first taste of human flight. Triumph and uncertainty mingle as the age of aviation quietly begins. In the early hours of the 15th of April 1912, around 2:20 a.m., the RMS Titanic lists and sinks into the icy North Atlantic after striking an iceberg. Panic and despair ripple across the decks, while the vast, frozen sea swallows both dreams and lives, leaving history with a haunting silence. On 8 March, women march along Nevsky Prospect in Petrograd, demanding the right to vote. Voices rise in unison, banners sway, and determination fills the streets, while the world watches a quiet revolution stir, reshaping the future of equality one step at a time. On the Somosierra front, during the Spanish Civil War, surrendered Republican fighters are escorted by soldiers. Dust, tension, and defeat hang heavy in the air, while the weight of conflict and fractured loyalties quietly mark each step along the battered battlefield. On the 1st of April 1939, Madrid falls to Franco's nationalist forces. Soldiers and tanks roll through streets once held by loyalists, greeted by crowds giving the fascist salute. Triumph and fear intertwine as a city changes hands, while the echoes of civil strife quietly linger. On a fateful day, the German airship Hindenburg bursts into flames while approaching Lakehurst Naval Air Station. Fire and panic consume the sky as 36 lives are lost, leaving the world stunned and the era of passenger airships forever shadowed by smoke and sorrow. In 1887, a realtor's map of Hollywood hints at dreams yet unrealized, showing a subdivision and a hotel that never left the proposed stage. Streets and plots lie quiet, carrying the promise of fame and fortune, while the future of a world-famous city quietly waits to be written. On the 25th of August, 1944, Paris celebrates its liberation as crowds line the Champs-Élysées, watching Allied tanks and half-tracks roll past the Arc de Triomphe. Cheers and tears mingle in the streets, while the city basks in freedom, yet the shadow of war still lingers quietly beyond the celebrations. On the morning of the 6th of June, 1944, Allied troops of the British Second Army storm Queen Red Beach in Normandy. Landing crafts surge toward the shore as soldiers brace against gunfire and chaos, each step a gamble between life and mission, while the tide of history quietly shifts in their favor. On the 6th of August, 1945, a blinding mushroom cloud rises over Hiroshima as the atomic bomb Little Boy detonates. Fire and devastation sweep the city in moments, lives vanish, and the world witnesses a terrifying new power, while the shadow of this day quietly reshapes the course of history. On the 27th of June, the historic San Francisco Room holds a moment that will shape the world. Dr. W.K. Wellington Koo signs the United Nations Security Charter for China. Delegates stand in solemn witness, and the promise of international cooperation quietly takes its first steps. On the 18th of October 1947, in New Delhi, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru addresses a vast crowd of Hindus and Muslims pleading for an end to factional violence. Amid the sorrow of recent massacres, his words seek unity, while the fragile new nations quietly struggle to find peace. In 1947, amid the turmoil of Punjab's partition, Muhammad Ali Jinnah meets the Maharaja of Patiala. Tension, negotiation, and uncertainty fill the room as borders and futures are decided, while the shadow of displacement and unrest quietly looms over millions waiting outside. In August 1947, Paris unveils Christian Dior's latest creation. The dress flows with elegance and innovation, signaling a rebirth of fashion after the war. Every seam and silhouette whispers luxury and ambition, while the world quietly turns its gaze toward a new era of style. In June 1953, atop Paris's Le Printemps, a retrospective showcases 50 years of women's fashion. Christian Dior's 1947 New Look stands on display, its shantung jacket and pleated wool skirt embodying elegance reborn, while the city quietly celebrates decades of style and transformation. In 1951, outside Seoul, U.S. soldiers command Chinese prisoners to the ground as the city braces for capture. Tension and fear hang thick in the air, each motion a struggle between control and survival, while the Korean War quietly sculpts a conflict that will scar millions for years to come. In 1955, Dr. Jonas Salk stands at the White House as President Eisenhower presents him a special citation for the polio vaccine. Triumph and relief shine on his face, while the world quietly breathes easier, marking a milestone in medicine that will save countless lives. On 29 March 1968, civil rights marchers, placards declaring "I am a man," stride past U.S. National Guard troops blocking Beale Street. Determination and tension fill the air, a city on edge, while the struggle for justice quietly presses forward, shadowed by the fate awaiting Dr. King. On the 17th of July 1962 in Washington, D.C., a House Space Subcommittee convenes to explore women's future in space. Representative Victor Anfuso examines an Atlas Centaur model, alongside pioneers Jerry Cobb and Mrs. Philip Hart, as ambition and possibility quietly push the boundaries of science and society. At Cape Canaveral, flames roar from the tail of the Atlas rocket as it lifts off Pad 14, carrying astronaut Scott Carpenter and his Mercury capsule, Aurora 7, into orbit. Triumph and tension surge together, while humanity quietly steps further into the vast unknown of space. On the 16th of August, 1961, 3 days after the Berlin Wall's construction began, combat group comrades stand vigilant at the Brandenburg Gate, armored vehicles at the ready. West Berlin's Mayor Willy Brandt and U.S. generals observe as a city and a world quietly confront the harsh new divide. In October 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, President John F. Kennedy confers with General Curtis LeMay and aides over surveillance of Cuba. In 1962, a US P-2V Neptune patrol plane shadows a Soviet freighter over tense waters during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Engines hum and eyes strain below, every movement loaded with suspicion, while the world quietly holds its breath on the edge of confrontation. On 2 February 1964, the Beatles, George Harrison, John Lennon, Ringo Starr, and Paul McCartney, arrive at London Airport, bound for New York. Excitement and anticipation ripple through the crowd, while the dawn of Beatlemania quietly begins to sweep across the world. On the 9th of April 1968, in Atlanta, a 150,000-strong crowd follows the coffin of Martin Luther King Jr. A placard bearing his portrait rises above the sea of mourners, grief and reverence mingling, while the nation quietly grapples with the loss of a voice that once promised hope and change. On the weekend of the 27th of June 1969, young people gather outside the boarded-up Stonewall Inn on Christopher Street, celebrating after days of riots. Laughter and defiance mingle in the air, while the quiet spark of a movement that would reshape LGBTQ+ rights begins to ignite. On the 20th of July 1969, at Tranquility Base, lunar module pilot Edwin "Buzz" Aldrin stands beside the solar wind composition experiment. Moon dust swirls around him, each step historic, as humanity quietly touches another world and the boundaries of possibility expand forever. On 15 August 1969, the first day of Woodstock erupts with music, color, and restless energy. Thousands sway, laugh, and dance together, a generation seeking freedom and expression, while the quiet pulse of a cultural revolution begins to beat across the fields. President Richard Nixon announces he will hand over 1,200 pages of edited Watergate transcripts to the House Judiciary Committee, claiming they will clear him of wrongdoing. Promises of transparency hang in the air, while the nation quietly waits, tension and skepticism coiling just beneath the surface. A CIA employee guides Vietnamese evacuees onto an Air America helicopter from the rooftop of 22 Gia Long Street, just half a mile from the U.S. Embassy. Fear and urgency ripple through the crowd, each step a desperate bid for survival, while the city quietly teeters on the edge of collapse. A firing squad executes 9 Kurdish rebels and 2 former police officers of the deposed Shah after swift trials, while the following day claims another 21 lives. The air is heavy with fear and finality, each moment a grim reminder of power and repression quietly exacting its toll. On the 22nd of September 2001, in West Tehran, Shahab 3 missiles roll past President Mohammad Khatami at Ayatollah Khomeini's mausoleum. The display marks Army Day and the 21st anniversary of the Iran-Iraq War, as pride and military might quietly mingle with the shadow of past conflict. On 13th July 1985, the finale of Live Aid at Wembley Stadium unites British pop icons. George Michael, Bono, Paul McCartney, Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, and Howard Jones share the stage, music and energy surging, while the crowd quietly witnesses a moment where charity, fame, and passion collide. On 13th July 1985, Wembley Stadium hosts the grand finale of Live Aid, a dual-venue concert born from Band Aid's Do They Know It's Christmas vision. Performers flood the stage, music swelling for famine relief in Ethiopia, while the world quietly feels the power of unity and action. In May 1986, weeks after the Chernobyl disaster, the nuclear power plant looms over a desolate landscape in Ukraine. Silence, radiation, and abandoned hopes hang in the air, while the world quietly grapples with the unseen, lingering threat of a catastrophe that reshaped history. On the 26th of April 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear plant explodes, sending smoke and radiation into the skies over Ukraine. Fire, chaos, and uncertainty ripple through the surrounding land, while the world quietly witnesses the dawn of one of history's most catastrophic nuclear disasters. On the morning of the 10th of November 1989, crowds tear down the first section of the Berlin Wall near the Brandenburg Gate. Henning Pless leads the charge as cheers erupt, symbols of division crumble, and while authorities scramble to respond, the world quietly witnesses freedom reclaiming its place. On the morning of the 10th of November 1989, jubilant crowds climb atop the Berlin Wall near the Brandenburg Gate. Laughter, chants, and celebration fill the air as decades of division crumble beneath their feet, while the world quietly witnesses the triumph of freedom over barriers. On the night of the 3rd and 4th of June 1989, a civilian rushes from Tiananmen Square as Chinese army forces occupy the area in Beijing. Fear and urgency grip every step, while the city quietly absorbs the weight of repression and the chilling aftermath of a struggle for freedom. On 4th June 1989, Chinese army tanks block an overpass on Chang'an Avenue, leading to Tiananmen Square. Hours after a brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protesters, silence and tension hang over the city, while the world quietly reckons with the weight of power and oppression. On the 14th of December, at CERN, British scientist Tim Berners-Lee works at a computer that will change the world. Lines of code quietly give birth to the World Wide Web, connecting minds and ideas, while the future of communication and knowledge begins to unfold. Millions of South Africans cast their votes in the nation's first free and democratic election, ending centuries of apartheid. Nelson Mandela emerges as the country's first black president, hope and jubilation filling the air, while a nation quietly steps into a new era of freedom. At a polling station in the Orange Free State, rural African farm workers wait in line to cast their votes in South Africa's first democratic election. Each step toward the ballot box carries hope and resolve as the nation quietly moves to end apartheid and embrace Mandela's leadership. On the 30th of July, 1994, Rwanda bears the heavy silence of a nation emerging from civil war. Streets, villages, and fields show the scars of conflict, while survivors quietly navigate loss and uncertainty, and the world slowly begins to grasp the scale of the tragedy. On the night of the 31st of August 1997 in Paris, Diana, Princess of Wales, sits in the back seat with her bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, and driver, Henry Paul. Moments before the fatal crash, a sense of normalcy masks the tragedy to come, while the world quietly braces for the loss that will shock millions. On 31st August 1997, the coffin of Diana, Princess of Wales, arrives at RAF Northolt from Paris. Mourning crowds gather in hushed reverence, grief and disbelief hanging in the air, while the world quietly contemplates the loss of a beloved figure whose life touched so many. On 11th September 2001, Rescue 1 firefighters race toward the World Trade Center after 2 planes strike. Sirens wail, and tension hangs thick in the air, each heartbeat a mix of courage and fear, while the city quietly braces for one of the darkest days in its history. On 11th September 2001, first responders battle flames at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. Water sprays and smoke curls into the sky, each effort a fight against chaos, while the nation quietly absorbs the shock of a coordinated attack that will forever mark history. In 1991, during the Gulf War, military vehicles roll past a mural of Saddam Hussein near the 5th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital at King Abdulaziz Air Base in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Dust and tension trail each convoy, while the quiet presence of propaganda looms over the theater of war. On the 26th of December 2004, Marina Beach in Madras lies in devastation after tidal waves crash ashore. Debris, sorrow, and silence fill the coastline as thousands are lost, while the world quietly witnesses the terrifying reach of nature unleashed by a distant earthquake in Indonesia. On the 19th of September 2005, in Waveland, Mississippi, a patriotic display stands amid the ruins of a home. Debris and devastation stretch across the landscape, while rescue and cleanup efforts quietly continue 3 weeks after Hurricane Katrina, a testament to loss, resilience, and the human spirit. On 6th October 2008, members of Code Pink wave protest signs as Lehman Brothers CEO Richard S. Fuld Jr. arrives to testify before the House Oversight Committee on Capitol Hill. Tension and scrutiny fill the air, while the world quietly watches the unraveling of a financial empire. In 2008, history is made as Barack Obama is elected President of the United States. Cheers and jubilation sweep across the nation, hope and change fill the air, while the world quietly witnesses a milestone moment that reshapes the course of American politics. On 1st February 2011, tens of thousands gather in Cairo's Tahrir Square, demanding President Hosni Mubarak's ouster. Chants and banners fill the air, hope and defiance mingling. While the army quietly observes, the city on the edge of historic change.